Well, good morning. Hello. Welcome. Another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Actually, it's episode 5 on our journey through the book of Romans. So today we're actually going to finish chapter 2. Wow, that's exciting. It is for you, it is Friday morning at 9 o'clock. At least that's when this is going live. So it's sometime after that you're watching it, perhaps. For me, it's 1:25 on Thursday afternoon. Uh, Pre-recording this for you, but doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I'm here. You're here. We're here together, while apart. All kind of weird stuff taking place. Anyway, it's another episode of PB Reads the Bible. So go ahead and let me know who you are. Even though I'm not watching this live, I'm not here live with you. I'll be checking out later on to see if there's any comments and things that I need to address. So say hello to each other as well. You don't have to say hello just to me. By the way, I'm Brian. I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. Hence the name PB Reads the Bible. Pastor Brian reads the Bible. We're finishing up week 1 of our journey through Romans. By the end of today, we will have completed 2 whole chapters, which means there are 14 chapters to go. So maybe it'll take us 2 days per chapter, maybe more on 1 or 2 of them, but I don't know. I don't have it fully fleshed out, planned out. We're kind of playing that by ear. I don't want to keep you too long on any one day or do too much talking at any one time, I guess, is part of how that is. But we're finishing up chapter 2. We will get that done. Just quick announcements, of course, for Sunday worship at 8:15 and 10:45. Both of those are in person. The 10:45 is also live streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and the website, so you can catch us out. You can catch us even if you're not around, or even if you don't feel comfortable being in a group. At this time, you can check us out. You can worship with us while you're somewhere else. Which is great. So I look forward to seeing you on Sunday, either in person or online, because I have you check in online as well. Excuse me. Forgive me for that. I don't have my microphone plugged in, so it's just going to be this, but I think that works okay here at home. I mean, here at the office, as long as I'm talking straight at you anyway, and I'll try not to turn around too much, and that causes issues. So, yesterday, today, we did the first half of chapter 2, and now we're going to dive into the second half of chapter 2, which has the subtitle "The Jews and the Law." Remember, remember, remember. I'm going to kind of pound away at this. We've got to be very careful when we distinguish sections, and get that idea out of your head that that's the only thing that this is about, or that it's completely isolated, because it's not. It's definitely connected to what Paul has already written, as well as to what is going to be coming up. What's coming up in future chapters. Some of the stuff he mentions here, he'll be bringing up again in chapter 8, chapter 10, something like that. Maybe both. I don't remember. As well as chapter 3. So it's important to remember that they are connected. It's a very finely woven piece of fabric. It's what Paul has created here. Going back to his tent making skills, he has put them to use with this instead. But let us read, shall we? Starting with verse 17. You who call yourselves Jews are relying on God's law, and you boast about your special relationship with him. You know what he wants. You know what is right because you have been taught his law. You are convinced that you are a guide for the blind and a light for people who are lost in darkness. You think that you can instruct the ignorant and teach children the ways of God, for you are certain that God's law gives you complete knowledge and truth. Pause. So who's Paul talking about when he says Jew or Jews? In that depends on the translation, how it's translated. But Andy Wright makes the pretty strong argument in this case, in this section, when he says Jew. This translates it as Jews plural, but in other translations it's Jew singular. But if you call yourself a Jew, is how the NRSV translates. I think the NLT takes a little bit of liberties with this. But in 17 it says, but if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law, etc., etc., etc. N.T. Wright makes the argument that Paul is actually you would say, writing to his former self. He is writing to his former self. So have that in mind and reread that passage, and you'll kind of see it. He does fit like every category, being a teacher, having truly known the law very well and taught it and spoke about it, and you're convinced that you're a guide to the blind and a light for people who are lost in darkness. So Paul would have seen himself as, Saul would have seen himself as that Pharisee, as that teacher in Judaism prior to his conversion experience. We can also hear in this echoes to Old Testament scriptures and to the promises of God, with God claiming this people of Israel for God's own people, and the covenant that God made with Abraham. A lot of this deals with the Abrahamic covenant, with the Jews as a nation being God's special people, God's chosen people, and being selected to be a light to the Gentiles. A light to the Gentiles. That's in there. That's in Scripture. So, which the Jews would have seen themselves as a light into the darkness. Also, an echo to Isaiah. An echo to Isaiah. You know, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light, etc., etc., etc. So Paul would, there's echoes in there to that as well. And so he's talking about all that. Continuing, well then, if you teach others, why don't you teach yourself? You tell others not to steal, but do you steal? You say it is wrong to commit adultery, but do you commit adultery? You condemn idolatry, but do you use items stolen from pagan temples? You are so proud of knowing the law, but you dishonor God by breaking it. No wonder the scriptures say the Gentiles blaspheme the name of God because of you. Pause. So Paul's turning his attention to Jews. Don't make the mistake that Paul is talking about all Jews. When he uses it, he's not talking about, a collection of all individual Jews. When he's using the term here, he's really talking about the nation of Israel as one unit. Okay, he's talking about the nation of Israel, and his readers hopefully would have understood that what he was talking about. He was not trying to say that all Jews are bad, that all Jews steal, that all Jews commit adultery, that all Jews participate in idolatry or in using stuff that's been in a pagan temple and all that kind of stuff. He's not saying that they all have done it, but he's saying that it does happen by people who call themselves Jews, by people who call themselves Jewish. And he's making a very strong case about that. He's saying, so don't try to say that you're better than everybody else. Don't claim to be a light to the Gentiles when you're doing the very things that you're accusing other people of doing. But perhaps not as individuals, but as your nation, as the people of Israel, as the Jewish people. So what he's talking about, and he says, you use items stolen from pagan temples? Some translations may make that a little bit different. You that abhor idols, do you rob temples? Is how the NRSV translates it. Do you rob temples? Probably literally, that's what it meant. That's what it is. But the NLT doesn't go quite literal. They go thought for thought, not word for word, and they say, do you use stuff that's been stolen from temples? So what's he talking about? It would be an argument against people who said, well, idols aren't real. They're not real gods, as they're pagan temples. So anything that was given to a pagan god is ours to do what we want with. perhaps some offerings or meat that might have been given and other foodstuffs that were placed in pagan temples. And it's been stolen, it's been taken away, and you guys are using it as you see fit. And that's not right, because not that there's any value in giving something to a pagan god, but what Paul's argument is, you're making Jewish people look bad. You're making God's people look bad because you're misbehaving, because you're being so judgmental, if nothing else, about these other people, to the point that others are blaspheming God because of you, Sort of like wow, if those are God's chosen people, what kind of God is he anyway? You're making God look bad. You're making God look bad. Continuing, the Jewish ceremony of circumcision has value only if you obey God's law. But if you don't obey God's law, you are no better off than an uncircumcised Gentile. And if the Gentiles obey God's law, won't God declare them to be his own people? In fact, uncircumcised Gentiles who keep God's law will condemn you Jews who are circumcised and possess God's law but don't obey it. Pause. As circumcision, yeah. It doesn't say, and if the Gentiles obey God's law, won't God declare them to be his own people? Literally, like the NRSV translates it, won't they then become circumcised? And Paul was not saying that they need to be physically circumcised. He's talking about a circumcision of the heart. He's talking about a circumcision of the heart. This is an argument against Jews who felt that merely having the law, merely having Torah, was like a security blanket. It's their, and it's a bedrock. It's the foundation, and they can just they sit on that and they're fine, because with the Torah, with circumcision, we are a special people. We are chosen by God. That's the basic argument. And Paul is saying, just having the law, just relying on the Torah, just relying on the covenant, just relying on circumcision, doesn't make you circumcised, doesn't make you part of God's special people, doesn't make you part of God's chosen people. It is in the doing of the law, it is in the keeping of Torah, that makes you part of God's chosen people. And by not keeping Torah, it is as if you are becoming uncircumcised. Again, not physically, but metaphorically, or in the heart, spiritually uncircumcised. Whereas someone who is keeping Torah, even though they don't have the Torah written down and spoken to them, and they're not part of the in crowd, but merely in doing Torah, in keeping Torah, they are circumcised and are now claimed to be part of Israel, a new Israel, a new covenant, part of the new covenant. So in this passage, we're hearing again echoes of from Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Isaiah regarding a new covenant, and new people, becoming new people. And Paul's claiming Gentile Christians to be part of this new covenant, to be part of Israel, not because they have the law and can rely on Torah, but because they keep Torah. I'm reminded of what Richard Steinbrink said with his in his second Zoom lecture. In fact, he titled it boy, a little bit of a brain cramp, but he said Judaism is a religion of deed, not creed. It's a religion of deed, not creed. So it really comes down to doing. It's not just about what's written down. It's not about what's written down. It's about how you act and what you do. And I think it's probably not exactly the same. I wouldn't want to put those words into Rabbi Steinbrink's mind, but or into his mouth, I should say. But I would say that it's similar to what Paul is saying here. Just knowing Torah isn't enough. You need to keep Torah. You need to be a doer. And what Paul is saying too, throughout all of this, because he says about it being light and darkness and stuff like that. He's saying that because you have failed, and again, that you isn't a singular person, nor is it each and every Jew, but it's the people of Israel have failed to keep Torah. They have failed to be that light in the darkness, and so they have become part of the problem. It's like saying the people of Israel, and because of the Abrahamic covenant and being God's chosen people, they were chosen for a purpose, chosen to be God's solution to the problem of sin and the problem of false worship, etc., etc. But the problem of sin, and it's like the doctor got infected by the disease. They were supposed to be the cure, and they are now part of the disease rather than. So God has to change plans and come up with another solution. Israel is now part of the problem. Israel has become a problem, and it has become God's problem. And so God has to come up with another solution for it. And Paul is setting this all up. Paul is setting this all up by talking about this. You cannot claim the fact that you are children of the covenant. You cannot claim that merely by being physically circumcised, you're good. You're not. You're not. Continuing. For you are not a true Jew just because you were born of Jewish parents or because you have gone through the ceremony of circumcision. Pause. So at that point, Paul's saying not just by birth or by adoption through by being a proselyte to Judaism. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. And true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law, rather, it is a change of heart produced by the Spirit. And a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God, not from people. Seeks praise from God, not from people. Hang on one sec. Or receives praise, yeah. How does receives praise? It could be written either way. The NLT change that last line, seeks praise, and is how the NLT translates it. But a lot of other translations, including the NRSV, says receives praise, not from others, but from God. Now Paul is actually doing a little bit of wordplay there. It's virtually a pun, because if you went through if you followed along in Genesis, we found out that the idea of Jew comes from Judah, the claiming the name of Judah, one of the children of Jacob, one of Jacob's children, one of the children of Israel, and what Judah means is praise, So Paul's doing a little bit of wordplay here by using the word praise mixed in with the repetition of the word Jew, because they're very similar. They're related to the same word. So a little bit of wordplay going on there. Paul uses wordplay a lot in his writings. So he kind of wraps it all up by just again coming down on that idea. Don't claim circumcision is as your backup. You can't just hear, you can't just read the Torah, you can't just read the Bible. You need to be a regular practitioner. You need to keep Torah, not just hear Torah. And it is this, maybe this is where we get that idea, the not obeying the letter of the law, but the spirit, so to speak. And Paul's talking about that here. It's not so much the letter of the law. It's not merely obeying the letter of the law, but it is the spirit, and it is being changed by the spirit, having the heart changed by the spirit. That also is a thought that that Paul comes back to multiple times. This idea of letter versus spirit of law, etc., etc. So Paul, that's it for chapter 2. I probably forgot to say something. There's actually a lot there that can be spoken of. Goes much deeper than I can get. So Monday we will turn our attention to chapter 3, which says God remains faithful. Chapter 3 is an important chapter, obviously. All of them are, but Paul's been building towards this. The problem of sin, and as kind of like I just said, Israel was supposed to be the solution to the problem of sin, was supposed to be the light in the darkness, etc., etc., etc. But since they are now part of the problem, God has to come up with another solution. And now in chapter 3, Paul is going to delve into what that solution is. All right, my friends, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for your time. I pray that you have found it beneficial, that God has spoken to you through something, and you've learned something or relearned something. That's always good too. As you go about your days, keep your eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open for what God is doing in your life. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, Papa," and then tell somebody about it, especially me. Until we meet again, be blessed, my friends. Be blessed. Bye.